Hey everyone, I'm Sabarish. I'm 14 years old. I'm super passionate about VR and AR. And here today, I'm here with Helen and Ted, who are doing really big things within the industry. And maybe we can just quickly hear about what you're doing in the industry and maybe what's the most exciting technology for you right now within VR and AR.
Absolutely. Is my mic on? Yeah, it is. Actually, you know what? First off, I would really love to know how many of you in the audience have had a VR experience. Can we say a show of hands? All right. And how many of you have had an AR experience? A show of hands as well. Okay, awesome. Pretty AR, VR savvy crowd. So my name is Helen Papagiannis. I've been working with AR for about 13 years now, coming up in September. I recently wrote a book called Augmented Humans, published by O'Reilly. And the book really looks at how augmented reality will change the way that we experience the world. And I guess what I'm most excited about in AR right now is that we are at such a pioneering period. It is a completely new communications medium. So, last week we had some big announcements from Apple at WWDC, and I'm sure both of you were watching. Yeah. And, just even the fact that we're moving towards a shared experience in augmented reality, moving away from this kind of single user experience and towards shared and multi-user, I think is really huge.
You, Ted?
Yeah, I'm Ted Biggs. I'm the Vice President of Technology and Convergent Projects at Shaftesbury Films. And we are a film company, TV company. We make Murdoch Mysteries and a couple other shows you probably recognize from CBC. And I run the kind of, I don't want to call it the skunk works, but that's how it started out. And we found ourselves over the last couple of years working in VR and AR and in clinical settings, primarily in the United States. We've found ourselves catapulted into this extremely exciting, slightly overwhelming, and pretty wonderful market, which is US healthcare. So.
Awesome. So right now when you look at AR and VR, so many things are going on. Just like 2 years ago, we were at the Oculus Rift, the first one that came out, and right now it's growing so fast. So maybe one of you can talk to what's going on in the market right now and how these different things in the market, like AR Kit or the upcoming Magic Leap, and how these different things are going to impact the industry.
Sure, we both can speak to it. So yes, absolutely. So AR Kit 2 was just announced, and right now we have most of our AR experiences on mobile devices. So right now, each of you, I'd say each of you, if not most of you, have the power of AR in your pocket. So most of the big players, so we've got Apple with AR Kit 2, we have Google with AR Core, we have Facebook with AR Studio, we have Snap with Lens Studio, we have Adobe with Aero. Who else am I missing here? We have, let's keep going. There's more.
Euphoria.
Euphoria, thank you, yes. And so right now we're on mobile, but we're also moving towards eyewear. And we have Microsoft, the HoloLens. I think you said you're a HoloLens certified developer?
Yeah, so I've been developing for the HoloLens for the past year, and I'm actually sponsored by Microsoft to do it. And yeah, that's something I'm really passionate about. And the HoloLens is a really cool device just because of the abilities it has with spatial mapping. And our mobile devices, our traditional apps aren't able to do that really and place these digital objects in a real environment. And that's what the HoloLens can really do a really good job of.
Awesome.
Yeah, we've recently started working with HoloLens as well. Because we're working in a very particular industry that has very stringent demands on the user side. And typically what that is in a hospital environment, and I apologize if I talk very specifically about our environment, but I've been completely immersed in this for the last 2 years. The people who run hospitals are nurses, and the clinicians who deliver healthcare on the front lines have to know how to use the technology, and the technology has to be really, really easy, functional, and it has to be able to be sterilized very quickly in our environment. So we're looking forward to untethered, high computational capabilities on the next cadre of releases of AR and VR headsets. The work we're doing is a little further back because we're using a lot of machine learning. So we're just kind of, we sort of aim 2 years ahead, and now we're just waiting for the hardware to catch up because we have a very demanding target audience.
So maybe just to follow up on that, what do you think is really important in terms of AR and its connections with AI, and how both of them are going to work together to really bring these digital 3D experiences to life? And even maybe impacting industries like hospitals or medical industries and really helping people and saving lives as well?
It's interesting. We found ourselves right sort of squarely in the middle of this interesting area where we have to make moralistic or moral decisions, ethical decisions about what we're doing with augmented and virtual reality, simply because we started working with pediatric patients. And what our technology does is it calms kids down, calms anybody down, up to 30% in about an 8-minute session. It gathers a lot of data about the individual users, which we use our AI to process. So what we had to do was be very, very careful with this personal data. It doesn't specifically qualify as medical data, but because of the environment that we're working in, we take great pains not to touch it. So we've had to take a very strong ethical stance off the top. Plus, because we start working out with pediatrics, because I have a 10-year-old. And really the reason we started this is because, as I was saying to these guys earlier, when you're at sick kids at 2 in the morning because your kid has split his lip open and everybody's touching the same toys and they're all going to have the same flu in the morning, you start thinking there must be a better way to do this. So we started coming up with ways we could use technology to distract kids, allow them to play together, which is where collaborative AR is going to be really interesting, and calm them down before some really upsetting procedures. So, but the core question for us is, how do you use artificial intelligence to have the best clinical impact in the shortest period of time?
Cool. Yeah, so I think with AI specifically, the data we're collecting, especially because now we're going from the 2D space to the whole 3D space, and you can collect so much data from where people are looking to where people are standing, like literally everything and all the actions that are doing to optimize these applications. So maybe this is for both of you, and when you look at all our different senses that we're using right now and how we're going to be using those senses, collecting data about them, and then using it later to optimize these AR experiences and make them the best for everyone.
Sorry, what's the question?
So it's about how you're going to be using these different senses and how we're going to be collecting data and what we're going to be doing with it to optimize.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying. So, yeah, and the thing is we are, with biometrics and gaze tracking, there's a lot of information that's coming into these experiences. For the most part, AR has been a visual experience, right? And, we were just talking about headsets, but one thing that I wanted to mention was headsets that use or that are focused on audio. So if you go to my Twitter timeline on AR stories, you'll see a couple of examples. Most recently, I posted one. It was a collaboration with Vuzix and a company called Scurfy. And it is an audio-based experience. So you're wearing glasses, and the glasses can see what you're looking at. They're tracking your eyes. And it is a tourism application. So it will tell you details about the building that you are looking at, and it will be read back to you. It'll be voiced into your ear. And there are some other applications like this that are helping people who are blind to be able to navigate the environments around them. So huge ethical questions and things that we need to think about. I don't know that I have the answers. And the thing is, right now, we are all pioneers. These are big questions that we need to absolutely ask and to be absolutely mindful of how we're using this data, of how we're collecting this data, and why are we collecting this data? Are we using this to enhance the experience? I think that's the absolute key thing, and maintaining that privacy for the wearer. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd like to, as I said before, I'd like to say that we would have made the right ethical decision, but we were put in a position where those decisions were made for us. And it basically made us pump the brakes. We had lots of data coming in as we started using AI and immersive media. And then because we were working with, in medical applications, and because we've started working a little bit in education, those decisions were made for us. It caused us to slow down. Now, as an entertainment company, the first impulse would be to say, well, this is a marketing tool. And there is going to be a lot of valuable information coming out of these things in terms of marketing, especially when you start pulling the data and crunching it with the power of machine learning. What's the right answer? I don't know. Just to be careful with it. Happily, our applications, I don't have to make those decisions because we're focused on teaching and calming people down and helping them use inhalational anesthesia more efficiently as they go into the operating room. So we have a pretty focused group that we're dealing with.
Cool. So when you're looking at marketing and like these different things, for people who are in the audience right now, what do you think is the biggest industry that could actually be impacted in terms of businesses and how businesses can eventually take advantage of this technology?
Marketing is a big one, especially with AR. And as the devices become more ubiquitous and easier to use, as 5G comes on, as a bunch of other things come into play, the marketing companies are going to be forced. Everybody knows what's been happening with social media and the data that's being collected. I think it's front and center as these new technologies come online that companies start asking these sort of ethical questions up front. They're going to have to, because I think there'll be a consumer backlash, and that would be too bad, because these are very exciting technologies with the ability to, deliver amazing entertainment, therapeutic value, educational value, as long as we don't go too fast. That sounds so old-fashioned, but it's true. I think we have to be very careful what we do with the data.
And when you look at the data that you're using for education and things like that, and right now we're all stuck to these phones, and all our a lot of our social lives are stuck within these phones. And do you think people will start to adopt 3D social media, and how do you think people will react to that first? Because just when you look at how we got into Snapchat, in the start, no one thought phones would actually become something we'd start using 10 years ago. And right now, we're all here using social media almost like every minute of our lives, and it's really interesting. And I just wanted to look at how, when this moves to 3D, how it's going to impact our lives and how people are going to look at it.
I think people will use it automatically right away. I mean, anybody who's tried augmented and virtual reality, whatever the experience was, if the tracking wasn't off and you didn't get sick, which is being fixed all the time, it was a lot of fun. I mean, how many people had fun using AR or VR? Put up your hands. Everybody? Everybody, right? Most people. So the thing is, as the technology gets better, as the devices get better, as they get easier to wear and use, as the experiences get more interactive, more complex, as they become more gamified, things like social media interactions will become very natural, I think, as long as we're careful about how we're treating people, because in a certain sense, it's, the term XR is thrown around a little bit in relation to this stuff. So you're stepping inside the media to a certain extent. It's no longer, the fourth wall has truly disappeared. And as such, because it's such an intimate contact with something you're putting on your face, we just have to be careful.
Definitely.
And our phones are everything machines right now. We pretty much use our phone for everything other than calling people, right? And so we're so accustomed to having these devices on us that it is quite natural to just move into an AR experience, since we already have this. And right now, all these kind of large companies are exploring mobile, and of course the next step is wearables and glasses. And that might be something a little tricky to get into, because at the end of the day, we're pretty vain creatures. We want to look good with what we're wearing. We want to feel comfortable as well. And it's going to have to be something that is not available on our phones, something that is going to be a hands-free experience, and that we also feel comfortable socially. So glasses for the enterprise will be a lot easier to do, because you're at work, and if you're wearing a helmet already or some other kind of protective eyewear, that's a logical next step. But being here in an audience and sitting and looking at you, and all of you looking at me with glasses, we will get there, but I think it will take a little while longer.
And when you look at the XR industry right now, how long do you think it's going to take? And not just when we're going to build the technology, how about when consumers will actually start adopting the technology?
Well, we're starting with mobile, but when it comes to headsets, I'm not sure, but it's coming pretty quickly. And to your point, Ted, it's happening very fast, and as this is happening, we really need to be mindful and responsible along the way, because we don't know yet. We can have the best of intentions, but we still don't know those unintended consequences, right? So timelines, look, there's already, HoloLens is on the market. It still is a developer edition. Magic Leap is coming out. I don't know if they have a date set yet. Vuzix, there are already devices out there, and Google Glass came back with the Enterprise Edition. So it's really, the hardware is there to a point. It's going to be about how is it delivering a meaningful experience, and that is what's absolutely critical, and that I hope is a takeaway for everyone today, is to really think about that we have the technology today, but what kinds of meaningful experiences can we create right now and for the future?
Cool. So so right now we're looking a lot into when we think about AR, we think about marketing, entertainment, gaming, these sort of fields. So in the future, what do you think is the real global impact of VR and AR? Like when you look at problems like inequality, security, poverty, where do you think are the real implications there?
Over to you, Ted. No, I'm kidding. Yes, very, very big questions, and thank you for asking this, because these are the discussions that we need to have. We tend to look at the darker side, what could go wrong, and these are things that we absolutely need to discuss. After answering your question, I'm going to flip it and say what could go right, and I think that's also really important to look at what are the positive implications. So with AR and VR, I would like us to see ways that we work towards not perpetuating isolation or loneliness and separateness. And that's why I think the announcement last week with Apple was a big one around shared experiences, about you and I being able to do something together rather than me being over here and you being over there, or even standing next to one another and still being isolated and lonely, right? So in terms of what could go right, I love that you're working in the healthcare space, because I think there's so many applications in this field, and as well for accessible technologies. I think later today in the keynote we'll be hearing about eSight, and there's so many applications. In my book Augmented Human, I talk about this too, about how AR can assist us in our daily lives, and the ability to help people who are blind navigate a space and interact with their surroundings is a huge positive implication.
Definitely.
The answer to the first question was 21 months. Sorry. I wanted to ask you something about waypoints and some of the applications, because we were talking upstairs in the green room, and I immediately saw an application for that in healthcare. It's an extraordinary thing, because you invent a thing and you think, well, it's about wayfinding in certain situations, but immediately for me, we have an avatar product that guides kids through pre-hospital visit, and then through the hospital, and then after, and is sort of their animated spirit guide, telling them it's going to be okay, and it's customizable for whatever procedure they're having. And I saw waypoints, and I went, that's what we need. We have to integrate it with that. That's an amazing application. Tell me some more of what you're thinking about.
So with WaypointAR, so it's basically, for people who don't know, it's like a navigation platform for indoor locations, and it's a pretty hard problem that big companies are trying to solve right now. Right now we have outdoor navigation for pedestrians and cars, but we haven't really looked into how to build these experiences within indoor location themselves, and that's what I'm working on. And when you look at specific applications for it and how it can have impact, you can look at like an airport. Even if it's a small impact that it's making, it's significant to maybe an immigrant or a refugee or someone who's coming in from another country, has no idea what the language here is. And completely customizing the whole airport experience according to their language, according to their taste, and using that to create more of something like welcoming within an airport. And obviously the medical field is looking at a completely different side about saving lives and making children feel comfortable, and I think AR is perfect for doing that because it's in the 3D space. There is a creative aspect to it, and it can really make kids feel more comfortable before going into these more painful experiences.
And as we were talking, the gamification of things, even if not everyone here is going to be a video game player, but many probably are. What we found is that by adding a layer of gamification, even if people don't know they're playing a game, it really adds to the positive distraction for people going into surgery, and it works for anybody of any age. Basically what it's doing is it's like three-dimensional worry beads, but you're immersed in this sort of experience at just the right level to keep you engaged for a certain amount of time, to lower your heart rate, lower your stress level, so you can go into surgery. The idea that this could be brought out with something like your system, so you're actually going, I'm not picturing children running around hospitals playing games with iPads, although that might be fun. What we want to do is have the idea that you can have this experience anywhere. And the fact that it's 3D, as you say, the fact that it's high-res animation in the room with you is just so cool. Really.
Yeah, and I think gamification is super important. Even apps that we use right now and the ones that we use a lot, like Snapchat, is completely gamified. And just like things like the streaks, these small things are keeping you engaged within the application. And it doesn't really seem like a game to you, but that's basically what you're playing, and it's helping them to keep you engaged within their platform and keep on using it. And I think when you're in a 3D space, there's so many distractions. Right now we're on a phone. There's just that small device that we're on, and once we're into this space, it's going to be really key to keep the user engaged, and gamification is going to be super important for that.
I want to actually talk about the user experience for a minute, and thinking about this move towards eyewear and keeping the user engaged, but I think it's going to be something that's quite delicate, because if we're wearing eyewear, we're not going to want all this information bombarding us at once. And I think it's going to be about a kind of this delicate dance between the senses. So knowing when is it the appropriate time to use something that's visual, when is it the appropriate time to use something that is audio-based, perhaps even haptics or tactile, and not overwhelming, being cognizant of the cognitive load, you know? And so in my book, I talk about this idea of calm technology, and it's a term that Mark Weiser coined at Xerox PARC in the 90s, and it's this idea that technology recedes into the background until needed. And I think this is a design principle and something that we're going to need to adopt more as we move forward.
Yeah, definitely, I think so, because it's all around you, and like even small things like when I'm looking at someone in front of me, like popping up a notification about them, or things like that within a 3D space can be super impactful to why the user would actually want to keep using the experience. And I think really like personalizing it, and I think that's where AI and data collection may come in. And even though we still have to look at the ethics with it, I think it's going to be super important to actually collect the data, take it into consideration, and then design these experiences to be as smooth for the consumer as possible.
Deal.
Well, we kind of arrived at that by accident again. It sounds like we're stumbling forward and up, and which is absolutely true. With new technology, that's always the case. We designed, for immersive technology in clinics, we designed the most accurate clinical interface for people they could possibly want, for the clinicians to say, well, so-and-so has this sort of condition, they're this nervous, we're going to have them in this experience with these colors. And we showed it to clinicians down in the US, and they just said, can't you just have a button that we push that makes it go? And we said, yeah, but we thought you'd like all this control. They said, we're too busy. We're too busy. We have, 10 kids going into surgery. What we need to do is know how old they are, what they vaguely like as a theme, and we need to calm them down. And you put the headset on them, that's it. So that's why we started using machine learning, because it was basically what happens is you program your own AR or VR experience just by playing it. And it has to come to that. So you're going to be collecting the data anyway. That's why the care is needed.
Yeah, so I think there's so many applications for AR right now, but I was just thinking about it. We've talked so much about AR, but we haven't looked into VR that much. And I think it's like a common thing that people, when they look at AR versus VR, AR immediately stands out because it's within our own life. We're not creating a completely different experience around our reality. And I just wanted to talk a bit more about VR and maybe immersive media, how it's going to impact that sort of thing. And right now we're looking at companies like Void, who here has tried the Void before? It's like basically the best VR experience you're going to try. Right now, you have complete haptic ability within this experience. You're able to touch all the objects, feel like you're inside this environment. It's like the most amazing experience, and I think we need to start having more people try that out because it can show the true potential of VR outside of entertainment even, and how we can use it. So I wanted to get your opinion on how do you think VR is going to impact our lives, and maybe in immersive media or outside of it?
Yeah, we started working a lot. We still work primarily in VR in this company that is doing healthcare and education. And we discovered a few things. And that you bring up the kind of narrative structure and how the Void feels is really interesting. We discovered that you needed to have an entirely different narrative structure. So the kinds of stories that we tried to tell initially, we're still doing them. We're still doing horror things, and they work very well because you can always do jump scares, and they work very well in VR. And my dev team is here, and they're laughing because I can't ever get through the stuff that they build, and they do it just to scare me. So. On the side of good, if you will, when we go into medical environments, the idea of escaping, utterly escaping from wherever you are, using a completely immersive environment is very valuable. It also seems to be very valuable in very particular training situations. If you're trying to teach STEM concepts, for example, and you just can't get it, coupled with AI that discerns your learning style in about 10 minutes or so, you can get core scientific concepts in a way that you understand them, so you're less daunted by them and you might go on to learn the math. So we're working with that sort of thing. What we're seeing VR, playing games for long periods of time is cool. We also see in very short bursts with applied learning or machine learning applied to it, you can get excellent sort of memorable results. And I think that it might become a very specialized thing, whereas AR is something that we have all around us.
How about you, Helen?
Well, my focus has been AR rather, but with VR, I think it'll be about, because we're spending so much time with VR. I mean, let's just very quickly summarize the differences between AR and VR. So, in virtual reality, you are completely immersed in a computer-generated environment, and whereas in AR, we're still here. We're looking at each other, and we have additional content that supplements our environment, and that could be audio, it could be video, it could be images, graphic text, what have you. So with VR, I think it's going to be about asking what are the applications that are best suited to VR, right? And things, it's kind of interesting about distraction, right? And with health, we've seen some really early examples of VR being used in pain treatments. So with burn patients, there's an example called Snow World, where children are wearing this headset and they are surrounded by snowmen and icicles, and it's to kind of help relax their central nervous system. And so in cases like that, I think that's just, wow, so powerful, right? So I think it'll just be about using it as it's appropriate. In training and simulation, that there are massive benefits of being able to go into an environment that might not otherwise be safe and be able to train in that environment as though you are really there with virtual reality. But I think it'll really just be about asking those questions, why AR, why VR, what makes sense?
Yeah, so with augmented reality, I think in our time right now, in the next 20 years at least, augmented reality is going to be really huge because we're using our phones already, and it's like the practical next step from phones and how we can start using it. But personally, something that I like to think is VR is, I think that VR is going to be really huge after the 20 years because I feel like people really like stepping into completely different realities. And I think applications are already doing that, like social media. We're stepping into this completely new world, but in a 2D space. And I think VR is too big of a step in the next 10 years, transitioning from phones, and I think it's going to be a smooth transition from AR to VR. And within this type of transition, you also need the other types of technologies and senses, and integrating smell or haptics and touching different objects. And I know that's something you're really focused on within your book, so I just wanted to hear a bit of your thoughts on how we can integrate senses into VR and AR and how that can be more helpful for the technology.
Absolutely. So by integrating the senses, we create a deeper sense of immersion. And so I've mentioned this today, earlier, is that for the most part, AR is still a visual experience today, and as well as VR. I don't know any non-visual VR experiences, do you?
Not really.
No.
Not really, because virtual reality is completely focused on.
Yeah, so in VR, the senses are used like haptics, rather, which is a sense of virtual touch, smell, and these are used to heighten the VR world that you see around you. And so in my book, there's a chapter that's dedicated to each of the senses. So it goes into vision, it goes into audio, touch, and smell, and taste. And all of this is actually possible today. Even though it sounds like science fiction, it is possible today. I'll give you an example in AR. So with AR right now, if you were to reach out and try and touch a virtual object, two things would happen. You would either feel glass, because you're touching your smartphone, or you would feel thin air, right?
Exactly.
And with haptics, it's possible to reach out and feel a virtual object. In 2010, I was very lucky to visit a research lab in Australia, in Adelaide, the University of South Australia, the Magic Vision Lab that was run by Christian Sander at the time. And I should say, so when I was doing my master's and my PhD, there were no textbooks on this stuff. So for me, it was really important to go to the places that it was happening. And so I went to Singapore, I went to New Zealand, I went to Australia, and this one particular lab was focused on haptics. So I was wearing a head-mounted display, and I had a special tool that was like a stylus, and I was able to see a virtual fish in front of me, and I was able to reach out and feel the virtual scales of that fish. Completely mind-blowing, and it really toyed with my perception, because when we have a sense of touch, it validates that something is real, right? That we know that something is there. And so this example, I was able to just have a deeper sense of immersion. So think about what that could mean for education, for training, for even, augmented retail, being able to feel that fabric of that shirt that you just ordered online, right? So being able to bring in the other senses definitely creates a deeper sense of immersion, and I think it also furthers storytelling, because augmented reality is a new expressive medium, and we know the world not just through vision, we know it through our senses. So how are we going to kind of integrate those things to create new stories?
Yeah, I think that's definitely very key for where we're at right now, because something that happens to me a lot, and something that happened when I first tried VR, was I got into this experience and then I saw these different objects and then I would try to touch them, because that would be the logical next step, because we have these 3D objects in front of them, and why are we not able to touch them? And I feel like that's one of the things that's stopping people from actually starting to use VR, because it feels very artificial, and you're seeing all these low poly objects, and it doesn't feel real like our real world, and I think that's really big. And looking into consumer adoption, and so right now I don't think many of us here have augmented reality devices or virtual reality devices that we are using in our daily lives. And why do you think that is for you, Ted and Helen, and what do you think is stopping consumer adoptions?
It's cost, I think, primarily. Although a couple of our tech partners who are trying to get us good deals to get untethered headsets into hospitals are lowering the prices pretty significantly. And some of them you're around $200, and it's mixed reality and augmented reality headsets are coming down all the time, VR too. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's a big deal. There's still a thing. Apple's announcement is cool. Sharing augmented reality spaces is cool. The form factor is a big deal, because if you remember 3D, if there are people here who went through the whole 3D thing, and I was working with an institution that had several $1 million worth of 3D equipment, which I don't know where it is right now, because it kind of came and went. Augmented and virtual reality are, I think, here to stay, absolutely. But one of the problems with 3D was nobody wanted to sit in their living room with those glasses on, even with your family and your friends. You feel funny sitting in your home. So I think that as the form factor gets it's easier and easier to use, people are going to naturally gravitate to it. And I think that they're naturally going to find the kind of experiences that they want to share and they want to use. And because there are people like us out here inventing new cool things all the time for them to try, the path will make itself. The form factor is a big deal, though.
Yeah, form factor, absolutely. And then I think the compelling experiences, right? We use Snapchat, those are still playful, right? It's augmented reality. Something that I think, because AR is a new communications medium, right, and it has to be two-way. An example that I've seen that I'm not sure if anybody here has tried it. I'm not sure if you guys have tried it. Vuforio's chalk. Have you tried it?
No, I haven't tried it.
So Vuforia chalk. Has anyone in the audience tried Vuforia chalk? I don't think so. So with Vuforia chalk, you are able to share what you're looking at on your mobile device and have someone else annotate it in real time. So this could be very useful for customer service experiences, or think about tech support. How many times have you called tech support and you try to describe the problem and that doesn't quite work all the time, right? So, but being able to point at something and saying, oh, it's actually this cable here, and showing someone in real time, and then someone else could draw an arrow on top of your view and be able to help you identify and resolve a problem. So that's an example of tech support or customer service, but also think about how many times perhaps you've gone to the grocery store and either your husband or your wife or your child has sent you and they want you to get something, and you send them back a picture and you said, is this the right one? But imagine being able to, in real time, show them what you're looking at, and they could point to what you need. And it sounds like a really simple thing, but how useful is that? I mean, how many of you do you think would you use something like that? Can you see a show of hands? You know, and I know I would absolutely use something like that. So when we think of creating meaningful experiences and killer apps in AR, it can be simple things too, simple things that we use in our daily lives. And an example like that of being able to just share what I see is huge, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I think a lot of the headsets right now are just the fact that their form and function is not really balanced, and you aren't able, and there's less of both of them, which is what really makes it hard for consumers to adopt them. And to be honest, in terms of price, I don't think it's that much of a problem anymore. Right now, we're investing $1,000 on an iPhone X, and when you look at augmented reality devices, they're coming down so fast. In VR, the average price right now is around $500. So actually, I don't think price is that big of a problem right now, and it's mainly just creating these headsets that us as humans are feeling comfortable using, and form is obviously the most important part of that. And I just wanted to close off the panel with one last question, which was, what do you think is a killer app for VR and AR for you, and what's the impact it's going to create?
I don't like the word killer app, to be honest. I think it's about meaningful experience. You know, because, you know, when we think of killer app, we also think about how we're going to make all this money really, really fast with this new medium. And for me, it's not about that. It's about, we have this opportunity. We have an entirely new communication medium, okay? It's like, think of radio, TV, film. We have AR and VR now. What are we going to do with it that's going to impact humanity and that's going to leave the world a better place? You know, how are we going to use this to elevate and enrich humanity? You know, so that's the killer app for me, is how do we find ways to do that? So with VR, I think it's about, I think it'll be healthcare. I think about being able to think about being able to kind of go in with a trained professional and being able to overcome a fear, right?
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And the same thing can happen in AR, being able to, actually, if you kind of look back in my bio, I did a pop-up book around this theme, and it was for children. It was around, it was called Who's Afraid of Bugs? And you would place your hand in the book, and, you know, spiders would crawl over your hand. And so this idea of phobias and being able to overcome them. So that's possible with AR too, but I think with AR, it'll really be about how do we use this as a new way to communicate with each other, to access information, and to make that information available to others.
Cool.
Obviously, healthcare and education are the ones that I'm focused on. I think they're amazing. But I think that they're going to show the way, not to the apps necessarily, but the sort of broader applications of the technology that are engaging us in ways that we haven't really anticipated. It's like, whatever the story is, like, it took 200 years after the invention of the printing press for people to start numbering pages because it hadn't occurred to them. I think it's going to happen faster, but we don't know quite what it's going to be. But I think it's going to be amazing and really entertaining and all around us as soon as we get used to it.